Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Pete, we're back. Saturday morning, Films and Stuff. I think we're both just bubbling with excitement for this episode, right?
Yeah. And normally, it's interesting. Normally we record this segment second, and usually we start with our streamer skips, but I think we should talk about House of Dragon and Rings of Power first.
It's our weekly doubleheader, if you will, right? We've combined these two because these are the two, elephants in the room or gorillas in the forest.
That's correct. They're or dragons in the mist, right?
Dragons in the mist.
In the sense that they're both the flagship programs for two of the premier streaming platforms.
Yeah.
Rings of Power with Amazon Prime and House of the Dragon for HBO. And they're both high fantasy, and they both have dragons in them. Lots of points of commonality.
Yeah. Which one do you, we're equal, right? I mean, these are really neck and neck, right? There's 4 episodes of each. I mean, for me, House of Dragons comes out on Sunday nights. So then we have a kind of a lag before we watch Rings of Power, and we've got our show.
That's right. So effectively for me, I consider House of Dragon a Monday morning watch because it's released Sunday late night US time.
Yeah, same.
Which is why even though on a weekly basis, House of the Dragon is 1 episode ahead, in terms of our podcast, in terms of our recordings, it's practically speaking on par because Rings of Power releases Friday mornings on Amazon Prime globally, whereas HBO, even on HBO, I think it's only released in the evenings on Sunday.
Right. One of the first thoughts I had after I watched House of the Dragon was that after what I thought was and we talked about this last week, I thought after we had a very lackluster episode 3 of Rings of Power, I thought that this was the opportunity for House of the Dragon to just kind of slay it and be there's no question House of the Dragon is better. And then House of the Dragon came back with this definitely highly discussed episode, but I mean, for me, this is, I use my mom as a gauge sometimes, right? This is the episode that my mom would turn off and be like, I'm not going to watch that show anymore.
This is the show that would separate the boys from the men, right?
The chaff from the wheat.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of people are going to draw the line after this episode because you saw... Look, let's not kid ourselves. It's not that Game of Thrones was a chaste or, very prudish show either.
Yeah.
It was really in episode 1 of season 1 where we see Jaime and Cersei getting it on as well. So it's not...
But that just had no context at the time, right? You didn't even realize it was scandalous because you didn't even know the characters at the time. It was only after the fact you're like, oh, that was wrong,
Yeah, and it was a little bit of after the fact, and it was also a little bit of the fact that they were also relatively same footing in the sense that they're brother, sister.
Yeah.
They're not uncle, niece.
Age difference.
And that becomes a little bit of an icky thing, if you will, because, now we're talking about a significant age difference, at least generationally, right?
Yeah.
We're also talking about this because it's not just a creepy old man going after this young, innocent woman. No, it's equally the young, innocent woman who's just like, oh, no, I want some of this too, right?
I'm so confused. I'm just so confused by the whole episode.
Okay, so maybe we're going ahead of ourselves. Let's do a quick recap of the episode. So let's, and obviously we're starting with House of the Dragons before we start with Rings of Power.
I mean, from just a location perspective, this is a very insular episode, right? Nothing happens outside of the city. Very little actually happens outside of the Red King's Landing. Yeah. And very little happens outside the Red Keep either. This is primarily focused on 4 people. Right? It's Daemon, it's Viserys, it's Otto, it's Alicent, it's Rhaenyra. It's really maybe a little bit of Sir Criston Cole, it's really just kind of like these 4.5 characters, and each of them has screen time with each other, but there's no swords drawn from the sheath. There's no battles. Oh yeah, this little thing with the courtship, right? But I mean, there's just very little, like, externally that happens. There's no dragons. There's no battle scenes. There's no really blood spilled. Yeah, it's one-on-one relationships.
It's almost like an exposition dump, or it's almost, I mean, it clearly isn't. It did drive the plot forward, but it's almost kind of like, this is the plot that the rest of the season is going to kind of go around. What's really interesting is, so last week we talked about, when you have a show that's 8 to 10 episodes long in a season, really the important thing is that by the end of the second, maximum third episode, you really want the viewers to understand what the conflict or what the driving force of the show is going to be. And we were reasonably confident that this was going to be a Game of Thrones, a literal Game of Thrones, right? Which is, it was going to be a race to see which of the 3 factions was going to end up being the king, because I don't think the show is doing a very hard job of telegraphing the fact that Viserys isn't going to be around forever.
Yeah.
He's getting paler. He's getting more sickly. He's getting a little bit more demented. He's losing digits left, right, and center. He's going to be out of the picture by the end of this season, if not earlier, is my estimation. And so I was sure that it was going to be a Daemon v. Rhaenyra v. Alicent / Hightower race. And now what I liked about this episode was that kind of turned it on its head. Is it going to be a 3-way race? Is it going to be a 2-way race? Is it going to be a 1-way race? There's no
Is it going to be a 4-way race?
Or exactly. Right? And now kind of Otto Hightower has kind of stepped into the ring, even though he hasn't officially, but you can see that they're telegraphing a maneuver with Otto Hightower somehow coming in. Maybe he decides to do the same thing as Daemon and back the Valyrians. Who knows?
I mean, Otto, if you're looking at the race, Otto basically has 2 horses in the race, right? He's got his daughter who's a queen, and then he's got, his grandson who is the first or only male heir, right, to the king.
That's right.
And yeah, I mean, I guess he could do all sorts of maneuvering or positioning with those 2 pieces on the chessboard with the other family.
So anyway, before we get too deep into that, so the quick down and dirty is that Daemon comes back to the kingdom. He has been crowned the king of the Narrow Sea.
Yep.
He then abdicates that crown to the one true King Viserys. He kneels before him. He gives him the crab feeder's sword and says, add it to the throne. And he basically swears his fealty in like an apologetic manner.
Can we just take a break right there? That's a very strange start, I thought, to this episode, because that wasn't like consistent with the end of episode 3. Episode 3, it showed that Daemon really had an antagonistic relationship with his brother, right? He did not want to accept his assistance, right? He's like, I'll just do this myself. And then suddenly we flip between the end of episode 3, the beginning of episode 4. He comes back and says, hey, what's mine is yours, and take it. And now he's like on very good terms with his brother. I liked it, but it would have made more sense if he would have accepted the king's offer of support. And with that support behind him, he would have defeated the crab feeder. And then he comes back and says, hey, like, thanks for the support. Everything that's mine is yours. You deserve this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I don't agree. I think, and we see this with Rhaenyra because she calls him out on it immediately. Literally the next scene when they're having that garden party to celebrate Daemon's victory.
Yeah.
Immediately she calls him out and says, I don't know what game you're playing. You clearly want something, right? And she makes that implication. And I felt exactly the same way. The moment I saw him do that, I thought, this is a ploy. This is a tactic. This is him doing something to get somewhere. I don't think this is him actually swearing fealty. I don't think this is him actually doing whatever it is. I think he was strategically kind of lowering Viserys' guard, which he very successfully did, at least in that first 30 minutes of the show.
Yeah.
And I saw this completely as a tactic. I didn't see this as something genuine.
Oh.
And then,
Well
of
done,
course,
Pete.
the curtain drops almost immediately, because after that, you can see that, and we've talked about this before, Daemon and Rhaenyra have a good relationship as uncle and niece. They enjoy each other. They love each other. They care for each other. And so Daemon sneaks her out of the palace. They go into the city, where he kind of exposes her to the fact that the people do not want her to be the leader because they expect a male king. And then he takes her to a house of ill repute. But what does he do before he takes her to basically this brothel?
Takes her hat off.
Exactly. And he does that. I think he does that strategically because that's the way she would get recognized. Because who wouldn't know what their princess / heir to the throne would look like?
Yeah.
He goes into this thing, and at first I thought, oh, this isn't going to go well for her, because I thought she would just be frame jobbed, right? I thought it would just be a frame job that she's doing this. But then they start making out with each other, and it's reciprocated. At first I thought, oh, he's going to go either rape her or make untoward advances, and she's going to have to fend for herself. But she's into it. She's into it big time. Right? And it's super creepy. It's super gross. That scene where where I think he holds back, because I think, and this is maybe me reading too much into it, I think he went in there to freak her out and not actually do anything about it. But then when he saw that she was into it, I think that freaked him out. And then that's why he kind of took off and didn't finish the job, as it were. And he literally leaves her there with her pants around her ankles and her shirt undone. And you're just like, oh, that's weird and creepy and gross. And then we learn, of course, that Otto Hightower has his spies around. He's informed, and we'll get into that. So he then informs the king that, by the way, your brother made out with your daughter. There's a potential issue there. Then we find out that Rhaenyra then forces his hand, because then
But hold on. Let's back up to that scene, because I think that's a very good point. I'm still not clear, and I've read a lot of commentary on this, and I've watched a lot or listened to a lot of commentary on this. I'm still not clear what Daemon was trying to do, as you mentioned. Was he trying to freak her out? Was he trying to actually close the deal and he changed his mind? Was he trying to close the deal and he couldn't? I think those are kind of like the three options, and I'm not sure which of those is accurate. What do you think?
My feeling is that if he were trying to close the deal, and if he wanted to kind of, make out with her, have sex with her, do whatever he wanted to do with her, I don't see the benefit of him doing all the other things of showing her the seedier side of King's Landing and showing her what life could be like if you were a man, etc. And doing that, he could have done that in the comforts of the castle on his own in private. If that was his ultimate goal. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that if he really just wanted to have sex with her and seal the deal, he could have done that in the castle. The other I really think that the goal was to kind of show her how out of her depth and out of her comfort zone she is. And she doesn't recognize it. Because you can tell that she's got a little bit of Joffrey in her, right?
Basically, he wants to show her that she's not at all equipped to be queen.
Either equipped or prepared. Right? Because she's got a little bit of Joffrey in her, right? When she's talking to Alan, she's like, remember, you're speaking to the heir.
Yeah.
So there are definitely moments where she's kind of got a little that spoiled brat in her. We saw a little bit of that also in the last episode, where she was kind of being like this whiny, basically teenage girl.
Yeah. She also said something when they were together in the city and they were watching that play, when they were mocking her. She said something like, their thoughts,
the people don't matter.
Like the feelings of the people are of no consequence to me.
Of consequence, exactly. And whereas Damon actually says what is the smart and politically savvy thing, which is it's the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
Because I think most royal families, even today, right, even in the modern real world today, would recognize that if you didn't have the people's support, royal families wouldn't exist, because there would be an uprising one way or another. And that's theoretically why most of the royal families that exist in the real world today in Europe and in Asia exist, because the people support the institution. If they didn't, they wouldn't exist at all. So he shows her she's ill-equipped or maybe ill-prepared to understand the weight of the crown. And then he also freaks her out, right? First, because she tries to turn the table on him by stealing something.
Yeah.
He turns the table back on her by taking off her cap, and then the guard recognizes her and then ignores the offense, as it were. And then he takes her to the brothel, and then he has his way with her, or almost has his way with her. And what got me really freaked out about this, and I am not someone who's kind of like grossed out often. We've seen so much on TV. We've seen so much on movies. She went in on it too. Like, she was keen on it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would have preferred that the scene was something where they would have kind of been involved, like with separate people. You know, they would have like watched a show, and it would have gotten her like really, you know, like aroused and turned on. And then they went home for the evening. And that's when she grabbed, you know, Sir Kristen Cole, right? Damon, I thought, was trying to teach her like, hey, you can take what you want in life. You know, you're letting everyone else dictate what you do. You can take what you want in life, and you need to learn to take what you want in life if you're going to be the queen, because you've got to lead. I thought that was kind of the message that he was trying to give. I just didn't really like their romance. And I mean, maybe it would have been okay if they would have been like kind of like embraced and stuff. But I really didn't like the fact that he just like stopped midway through and left. I thought that indicated something totally different. And it wasn't part of his plan to just be like, hey, see ya, I'm out.
Yeah, but then you know what? I think he used that to his advantage. I think he was just like, listen, she's into it.
Yeah.
We're Targaryens. Incest isn't a big deal for us. So what if I now turn this against the king and use this to my advantage, right? And when Viserys makes the allegation, he doesn't deny it. Even though they didn't actually have sex. And when Viserys says, I heard you guys had sex, he doesn't deny it. He doesn't say, no, we didn't go all the way. We didn't do anything. He was like, no, we totally did. She wants it. I want it. Let us get married together. That'll solve all your problems. And it eliminates the issue of the heir it legitimizes Daemon as the king when Viserys passes. So that gives Daemon what he wants. It destroys the issue of what Rhaenyra wants, because she clearly has no problem being with Daemon, right? So you kind of knock two birds with one stone in this case.
So you think this is his plan? His plan was he's going to just try to find a way to take out Rhaenyra, and he's going to elevate himself to be basically the second in line, right?
My feeling is that Daemon coming in at the beginning of this episode was a Trojan horse. Was that he came in, let me get back into the good graces, and let me find ways I can lever the situation to my advantage.
But in order to, there's two things that I agree with this, but there's two details that I'm not sure are aligned with that. The first one is, if he really wanted that to happen, he would have had to arrange for, you know, the disclosure to Hightower. And from what I can tell, it was Mysaria who, that kid, right? When Rhaenyra ran out, some little kid kind of stood up and followed her. That was obvious. And then you also caught just the beginning of the scene when Damon was hungover and on the floor before Mysaria gave him like some hangover tea.
That's right.
That she was kind of like meeting with the kid. And it seemed to be the kid told her, and she told Hightower, because she also made a statement to Damon, something like, hey, I'm done being just a piece of meat. I'm going to start, trading in a different type of currency. So I thought that she was then the narc, as it were. And if that's the case, that means it wasn't really Damon's plan, because if he really wanted to besmirch her, he would have found a way that he would have got that message back to Otto or to someone, right?
Mm.
So that's what confuses me. If that's really his plan, he's got to have someone himself who's planted in that brothel say, hey, be on the lookout. I'm going to come in, and whoever I'm with, please report it to the king. Like he's got to manipulate that. He can't just say, hey, I hope someone tells on me, because he knows that he's like too powerful. He's the head of the city watch. This is like the queen regent. The default position is no one's going to tell on them, right? So that makes me think it's not his plan, or not precisely his plan.
Yeah, I think his plan evolved over the course of this episode.
Changed. Yeah,
I think it went in one way, and I think he tried to take advantage of the situation as it evolved. We'll know more. I mean, Mysaria is clearly like Varys in Game of Thrones, right? I think she's collecting secrets, or, she's basically playing herself as the middleman in terms of, I want to side with the winner, so I'm going to play both sides.
Yeah. So who are the winners and the losers of this episode? I mean, Hightower seems to be...
Rhaenyra, winner.
I think the opposite. How can she be a winner? I feel like she's a huge loser in this, right?
Oh, no. I think Rhaenyra winner because A, she gets some, right? B... No, and it's not insignificant for her, right? Because she made that comment to her father, is that if you're a man, you could sleep with 15 different women and it wouldn't make a difference. I'm the princess, I can't do that. So A, she got some. Okay. So she got that, she achieves that. Plus she had her, plan BT, so she can avoid pregnancy. 2, she eliminates Hightower, right? So she says to her father, fine, I will play the Game of Thrones. I will marry Sir Larion Valerian.
Yeah. But hold on.
But I'll only do that if you get rid of Otto Hightower, because he is no longer impartial. He is vested in making sure that I do not become queen after you go.
I think you are half right. In terms of she's a winner because she eliminated Hightower, you're absolutely right. I didn't see that. Very, very good point. But in terms of the first part, I mean, maybe on a physical basis, she had a short win. But in terms of the tea, I think that the Plan B tea is really fraught. And the reason is she swore to Alicent on her mother's memory that she did not do this. And she kind of said the same thing to her dad. So if that's the case, she can't drink the tea. If the chambermaid comes the next morning and says like, hey, she drank the tea, obviously she was lying. If the tea is not drunk, then it's like, yeah, she was telling the truth. She had no reason to drink the tea.
I know what you're saying, but I think that might, in my opinion, that might be reading too much into it. I think it was just a matter of, she swore up and down that she didn't to her father and to Alicent, but I think her father was like, I don't believe you anyway, because that's also his way of asserting that, listen, I'm not the dummy you think that I am, so drink the bloody tea, whether you had sex with your uncle or not. There's no harm in you drinking the tea, so drink the tea, because I still believe. So even though you swear that you didn't, I think you still did. So drink the bloody tea.
I think it's, I don't know. I mean, that's where the lie comes in, though, right?
I agree with you.
That's like that's like the lie detector test, where he backs her in a corner and says,
yes. So I agree, and that could be a great plot point going forward.
Yeah.
Because here's the other thing, is that I am not 100% sure that Rhaenyra would be, in this show, would be smart enough to understand the implication.
I agree. And she did have sex, right, with Sir Kristen Cole. It may not have been
exactly.
And to be honest,
it may not have been Damon, but she still had sex.
Let's say one of two different scenarios though that's really going to make this a disaster. Let's say she either drinks the tea, or, considering this is like a million years ago, the tea doesn't work because it's just a bunch of like beetroot and bark and a bunch of stuff that has no scientific merit, right? So let's say that let's say she does get pregnant, right? The world is going to think that's Damon's baby. It's not, right? That's another like really huge pinpoint where, first of all, Damon's going to know, wait a second, it's not mine. That kid's got no claim to the throne. The father is going to be like, okay, like this is now the Regent Queen's son. Kristen Cole's going to be carrying possibly some knowledge that at least 50% could be his, right? He doesn't know the whole story. That could be like a major turning point, or not a turning point, but like a major secret that's kind of kept within the family. If she has a baby, and some people believe that it's Damon's, and some people know for certain it is not, right?
I mean, in this case, first of all, she would have to get married because they wouldn't allow her to have a baby out of wedlock.
But she's getting married next episode, right?
Public. That's one.
Yeah.
Two, very frankly, and also this is incredibly gross, and I hate myself for even thinking it. Again, Rhaenyra, not the most politically savvy or maybe even the most intelligent person of the people that we're talking about right now, although she demonstrated great political savvy by getting Otto out.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of general life, I don't think she's got the most savvy. I'm also pretty sure that if she were pregnant, A, she wouldn't be able to hide it, and B, Viserys wouldn't allow her to have the baby.
I have to say, I feel like the stock of Rhaenyra has decreased. I know it was a shrewd move to get rid of Otto, but if you're watching the show, I feel like that's a character like, I really liked her. She was so sweet, and she always like, she was a little bit bratty, and yes, she was a little bit like grumpy because she didn't feel like her father was giving her enough attention, but she always carried herself so nice. She was so pretty. She dressed well. Now after this episode, I feel like there's a lot of people emotionally who are like, screw her.
She's a liar. Yeah. She has unprotected sex with randos. Yeah. She got a guy sacked. Again, although by far, quite possibly the strongest line was, I will do my duty as the princess and marry Sir Valerian.
Yeah.
But first you have to do your duty as king and get rid of Hightower. Yeah. I thought that was brilliant. Here's where things get interesting.
Here's where things get spicy. Who's going to be the hand?
Well, that's the thing. Had Daemon not fudged it up, I think he could have played it off and put Daemon at the hand. But there's no way Daemon can be the hand anymore.
No way.
There's no way he can be hand anymore.
And that's really not Daemon's natural role. You know, he's...
Again, you're absolutely right. He's more of a leader of armies than he is a leader of like political battles. But having said that, I still think that Daemon is trying to do what he can, how he can, where he can to instill himself as king.
I agree.
So whatever he would do, he's got some kind of plan in mind, which is obviously changing and shifting.
Work in progress.
We don't know what it's going to be next week.
Yeah.
We don't know what it's going to be after the week after that. We don't even know what it's going to be halfway through the next episode. It could probably change. Let's take a step back at the show. Right now, I like the show. Don't get me wrong. I think this last episode was not a downer. I think it's elevated the stakes in some ways, but also, as you rightly pointed out, kind of made it, a lot of the people in the show are unlikable. Yeah. And it's hard to find someone now, especially, who you still are rooting for. I'm not really rooting for anyone at this moment.
Yeah, there's no Jon Snow. There's no
Daenerys.
Ned Stark. There's no Ned Stark. There's no Stark's kids. Yeah, there's no Bran.
There's no one that you're just like, this is the one I want to see win the Targaryen race. Yeah. They're all a bunch of unlikable jerks for one reason or another. I'm not saying it's making the show hard to watch. No. In fact, it's interesting because they're all jerks. So which is going to be the one that comes out on top? It'll be interesting to see. But on an episode by episode basis, it makes it more difficult to watch in the sense that because you're not rooting for anyone in particular.
I mean, if I'm looking at the architecture of this show, and I agree with you, I think the show is extremely watchable and captivating, even if you're watching is kind of like
an impartial observer almost, right?
But it's definitely not something that you feel like walking away from, right? Like you don't go to the other room. You don't like check your messages. Like you don't want to miss anything. And I think that's very powerful.
No, it's no Rings of Power. That's for sure.
We'll get there. Yeah. But I would say that if we're looking at the architecture of the show, I assume that these 4 episodes were heavy on Targaryens to kind of lay out the land and show kind of the backstory in terms of how everyone got to where they are. What I understand from this next episode is that Rhaenyra is getting married, and now we're going to start to introduce some more people, families, and it's going to start to like expand a little bit. But at least these 4 episodes were a little bit like insular, so that we understood really clearly what baggage everyone had going into like the real battles amongst each other, right? And in terms of the hand to Viserys, I guess I'd handicap this in 3 ways. 1/3 likelihood he has no hand and it's just vacant. 1/3 likelihood it's someone we've never met before. 1/3 likelihood Otto comes back and snakes his way into a renewal of his contract, so to speak, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You said something really good, and let's use that as our transition point.
Our segue, yeah.
This is so much more watchable, or I should say, like captivating, than is Rings of Power. Do you agree?
Yes. I will caveat that it's a heavily accented yes, because I have thoughts about this week's episode.
Do tell.
I thought this week's episode was a leap in the right direction for the show.
Okay.
I was actually quite pleased. It's interesting. Normally, I have a lot more to say about House of the Dragons than I do for Rings of Power. And this week, it was kind of a flip because of how small House of the Dragons felt, because it was basically just set around King's Landing.
Correct.
And nothing outside of the 4 or 5 people like we mentioned.
Yep.
And one of the problems we've had with Rings of Power is that it seems to be flitting around too many people, too many places, too fast, that it doesn't allow us to get attached to anybody. Let me talk about what are some of the good things, right?
Yes.
1, no Harfoots this episode.
Yes.
I thought that was wonderful.
No more Nuri. Yes.
No Nuri. And again, no disrespect, but like her character, that storyline, it's going nowhere fast.
Yes.
And I don't like that. It's
agree.
taking away screen time from, at least at this point, things that I'm more interested in watching.
Yes. Thank you.
So I like that we saw no Harfoots in there.
Correct.
Second, I liked that we finally are getting to see a little bit of advancement where, when we're at the Elven City, you see the forge being built. This massive forge is being built. It's more than half done. Mm-hmm. So it's nice. And it's also, you get to see the elves and the dwarves working together. I thought that was great. 2, we see that throughout the course of the episode, we finally get a little bit of payoff for Galadriel spending time in Numenor. She also gets a reality check or a gut check, which I thought was very well needed, right? Because the problem I've had with Galadriel is she's been like this overly confident, overly stalwart, I am right, you are wrong, it's my way or the highway attitude.
You're right.
Which is fine. It might be an elvish trait. But if you compare that to someone like Elrond, for example, who's also an elf, he is much more sincere. He's much more willing to say, I was wrong. He's much more, not subservient, he's much
diplomatic.
He's diplomatic. And he's not just diplomatic, but he's also like, he looks inward. Yeah. And she doesn't. Mm-hmm. And she finally gets that gut check when she gets thrown in jail. for making these literally demands to the Queen Regent, which, it's absurd that anyone would do that. Like, it's so arrogant. She's such an arrogant person. And then when she's in jail, it's her compatriot who is like, listen, you can't think the way you think and expect that people will do things for you. That's not how the world works. You have to understand that. She gets that gut check. She finally gains a little bit of insight. And because of that, she is able to, obviously, there's a lot more that around it. I'm being very simplistic. She gets the men of Numenor to say, we will go to the Southlands and we will fight for our brothers in the Southlands. We're going to help them. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was great. Okay, so that finally happened. So I'm not saying it's a conclusion to Numenor, but I like that we're seeing advancement out of Numenor.
I thought that everything related, the Numenor-related scene I thought was great. I was really engaged by that. And I thought also, as you mentioned, the elves and the dwarves working together and, the scene with the mine, I thought that was also, compelling. That part was okay to me. I'm still a little bit fuzzy on some other parts though, right?
Okay, let's break it down. What are we fuzzy on?
I'm not sure about Arondir. And I'm not.
Yeah, I was just about to say, we finally get to see the antagonist of the season, or who I expect to be considering this is 5 seasons long, I think that he's going to be the antagonist of this season, but I expect that he's going to be the, let's say, sidekick, or, let's say the junior or senior lieutenant to the main antagonist, because obviously the main antagonist is going to be Sauron.
Yeah. So can you help me though understand? Initially, he was an elven soldier, correct?
Correct.
And he was captured.
Yes.
But he was a good guy. And at the end, we see him, trying to help his girlfriend and her kid. Did he become a bad guy somehow?
No. So when he's at that prison camp, remember everyone was talking about Adar.
Yes.
And then we see another elf.
Yes.
And that other elf had darker skin. He looked a little grimier. And all the orcs called him Adar. And Adar in Elven means father. Mm. And they were working for this one elf. And this elf speaks to Arondir. And, he kind of talks to him. And Arondir learns that he was an elf because they're speaking in Elven.
Okay.
We see that guy is an elf that has fallen. And he proves that he's an elf because he knows he knows the place that Arondir is from. He talks about the river. He talks about the flowers that grow by the river. And so he convinces Arondir that this guy was an elf.
Okay.
Obviously he still is an elf, but that he's a fallen elf. And remember I told you a couple episodes ago that in The Lord of the Rings, the main orc leaders were all corrupted elves and men. Fallen elves.
So Sauron converted them or corrupted them?
Yes. Theoretically Sauron or the forces of Sauron or whatever it is. The people working in that thing. Again, I'm not 100% clear on that, but yes. So this guy, Adar, that we meet, the quote-unquote father, he shouldn't be being called father by orcs because he's an elf and they're orcs, they're naturally enemies.
Yeah.
But the orcs revere this guy because he's now working for Sauron. Again, this is conjecture. I could be very well wrong, but this is what I perceived it to be based on this episode.
Okay.
And then he lets Arondir go, and he makes him an offer that he has to take to the humans of the Southland. Because remember, the elves are there as a protective force that the elf kingdom has put in. They're not the decision makers. Ultimately, the decision makers are the humans. They're just kind of like patrols who kind of help them out and protect them. So he goes to Arondir and says, I will let you go, and you need to take a message back to the people you're protecting, to the humans of the Southlands. You need to tell them to vacate these lands and give the lands up to us not for free, but as in without resistance, or we will come and kill them all. And that's why he lets them go. So he lets Arondir go, And that was the whole purpose. Remember, we see Arondir go away and finally make it back to his girlfriend and the son. It's not that he's a bad guy he's basically a hostage who was released with a message for the humans, which is, if you guys don't bugger off, we're going to take these lands forcibly, and that's not going to end well for you.
I mean, so what's the next storyline that's going to happen in the Southlands then?
The way this is set up
is headed as well, right?
Correct. So the way this is set up, I think what's going to happen in this season is that by the end of the season, we're going to get the drama, or we're going to get the setup of the conflict, which is the men of Numenor along with the elves. I don't know if the dwarves are going to be involved in this or not. In fact, I don't even know if the dwarves are going to be involved in this or not, but definitely the men of Numenor, led by the Queen Regent and Galadriel, are coming back to Middle-earth to help the men of the Southlands defend their lands against this rising orc scourge.
Okay.
I suspect that there's going to be a massive battle sequence or whatever, but that's what I think season 1's arc is going to end up with.
And tell me, why does Numenor care what happens in the Southlands? Just because if the Southlands fall, that they're next?
It's because they're men. One, they're men. Oh. Traditionally in the lore, it's kind of been like you have alliances and allegiances to people of your own race.
Okay.
So like if you remember in Lord of the Rings, that was also the same problem. Gondor, the king was supposed to help protect the other lands, and they didn't because the king was corrupted, but Gandalf came in and helped them, and finally they said, no, I am free from this corruption, so I will go help. So he helps out in the Two Towers, and then when they called for aid, they went to Minas Tirith. They also helped Minas Tirith. So it's kind of like look, I'm a man, you're a man, we're being attacked by orcs. I need your help to protect myself, because if they attack you, I would do the same for you, because men stick together.
Okay, and why did the elves care?
So the elves came to Middle-earth to battle Sauron's forces thousands and thousands of years ago. They destroyed them, or so they thought. And then the whole point was the elves said, okay, now we can... Remember, that's why the first episode, Galadriel's army was sent back to Valar.
I mean, this is basically just Galadriel's proxy war because she's trying to get revenge for her brother dying, right?
One, she wants to get revenge, and two, she doesn't believe that Sauron is dead.
Yeah.
But whereas most of the other elven kingdom does believe that he's gone, because it's been a couple thousand years or whatever it is, and they haven't seen him anymore. It's a little bit cliched, but it's always that one person who's like, no, there's something wrong, and it turns out to be there is something wrong. That's what this is.
So how are you feeling about Rings of Power? You said that this was a big step.
It was a leap forward for me. It was a leap forward because we finally get a little bit of movement that's beyond world building. At this stage, there's no more world building because we're introduced to the elves, we're introduced to the dwarves, we're introduced to the men of the south and now Numenor. So we've kind of seen all the big players. We've seen where all of them live, how they live. Great. We get to see that the Forge is moving along. I don't know if the Rings of Power are going to be forged in season 1. I think it's probably going to be closer towards the second, third season. Again, I'm just speculating on the basis that we know there are 5 seasons. But I like that we get a little bit of plot momentum. The thing was that the first 3 or 4 episodes had very limited plot momentum for a show this big. And finally, it's kind of catching up. They're, I think, 2 episodes too far. I think this should have happened really within the first 2 or 3 episodes. But fine, it's finally happening. I'm not giving them a pass for it, but I am saying, okay, at least it's moving on. I'll forgive the Harfoot nonsense as long as they don't go back and spend too much time with the Harfoots.
Can I tell you something, though, that's a little bit frustrating to me? And I feel like this show, for House of the Dragons, by contrast, has scenes and events play out, and then you understand backstory and things. Whereas I feel that Rings of Power, these people just appear out of nowhere they have this really important conversation, and the conversation is just only for the purpose of explaining something to me about why something happened or is happening, right? Like,
I think that this show also really hurt itself because the writing is... I think that the writers have made an assumption that they shouldn't have made the assumption. And the assumption I think most of the writers have said is that 95% of our audience will know the Lord of the Rings trilogy really well.
I think that's really a really crazy assumption to make.
Yeah, and I think that was a very bad assumption to make for a couple of reasons. One, it's been 20 years since the last Lord of the Rings movie came out. It's been at least 10 years since the last Hobbit movie came out. So that's one. And two, or the reason I can make the leaps of logic and the leaps of faith that I'm making with this storyline is because I know a little bit of the lore from outside of the movies.
Yeah.
How much is your average viewer going to know outside of having watched the movies?
I mean,
not that much.
That point is doubly good because this is on Amazon Prime. And given how much they paid for it, I'm sorry, Pete, they're not going after the Petes. They should be going after the Ethans, right? I should. Yeah. I mean,
more importantly, they should be going after the Ethan and Pete's moms.
Yeah.
They should be going after people who are like, no, I don't want to watch incest on Game of Thrones anymore. So I'm going to move over to Rings of Power. Similar concept in terms of high fantasy, but much more family friendly.
I'm telling you, this is exactly my genre. No one can argue that this is not my genre. I have not seen the 3 Lords of the Rings. I mean, and that, even as you mentioned, that's 20 years ago. I'm really having a problem following this. And if I'm having a problem following this, and I'm someone who's watching every episode, reading, talking with you, and sincerely trying to get it, it's hopeless, I think, for someone else. And if you're really spending $1 billion on this and you're really trying to make this your flagship that people are going to subscribe to, I think you've got to... We had this conversation a little bit with Halo, but I think you've just got to slow it down a little bit and somehow find a way to get me more up to speed in terms of what is happening and why it's happening.
Honestly, I don't know the solution to this. I just don't know the solution to this.
I mean, anyone who's 20 years ago, sorry, but 20 years ago, let's say someone read all the books, right? They watched all the movies when they were in university, right? Okay, that means, let's just say that they're at 20 at a time. As you mentioned, they're 40 now. 40 is, okay, it's not like a senior citizen, but it's certainly of the age where most likely you've got family, you've got responsibilities. You don't have a whole lot of time to be watching this, right? If you're 30, you were 10 when Lord of the Rings came out. You probably didn't even see those, you barely remember them, or... to me, it's hard to invest in it this much time in something like this.
Yeah, that I agree. My feeling is that...
How did these movies age? Let me ask you something. Let's say that you're 25 years old, right? You're the heartbeat of who should be interested in this, right? You've got disposable income, disposable time. It's fantasy. And you're like, hey, I'm 25. I was 5 when the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out. I haven't seen any of those. I'm going to watch them now. How have those aged? Sometimes you watch...
Very well.
Oh, really?
Very well.
So you watch...
Incredibly so.
Oh, really?
I saw a clip from Return of the King.
Yeah.
And it has still aged very well. I have no doubt in my mind that if I sat down and watched all 12 hours of the extended edition, I think I would be very happy.
Oh, really? Because, we have that one mutual friend who shall not be named, but he's listening, who's never seen Star Wars. And I have to say, and I think you've said this with me as well in private, to watch A New Hope is asking a lot. Okay, that's 40 years old, not 20, but watching A New Hope is probably asking a lot, right?
And you're right. It's not, listeners should be aware when we say it's asking a lot, we fully recognize that we cannot talk about visual effects because You can't compare visual effects from 40 years ago to today. It's not a fair comparison. But really think about Star Wars. Forget about the story. The premise is excellent. Forget about that. But really critically think about A New Hope. The dialogue was terrible.
It's a little bit stiff. It's a little bit slow.
The pacing was a little off. And these are all fair. I love Star Wars. Don't get me wrong. I will die on that hill defending Star Wars.
I'm right there with you, buddy.
Many people would. Exactly. But I also am objective enough to recognize that Star Wars isn't the perfect movie. There are so many flaws with it.
Yeah.
So it holds up for a lot of reasons, but at the same time, it doesn't hold up for a lot. Whereas, Lord of the Rings, I think holds up a lot better, relatively speaking. It's a different kind of story, different kind of movie. But I think the trilogy, it's still chef's kiss for me. It's very good.
Do we have anything more to say about House of the Dragon or Rings of Power for the upcoming episodes this week?
One random comment. As of this last week, Rings of Power is no longer Amazon Prime's most expensive TV show.
Oh, no. What happened? What overtook it?
The NFL Thursday Night Football.
Oh, really?
Amazon Prime paid $13 billion to the NFL over the next 10 years for exclusive broadcasting rights for most Thursday night football games in the United States, which means everywhere. Breaking it down, it comes out to about $70 million per game.
Since we're on the NFL, let me make a small plug for something that I've gotten for the first time this year. I have the NFL Game Pass package.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It is $237 a season. And I've watched, obviously, only week one. It is absolutely a bargain at twice that price. What I can do is I can do split screen. And on one screen, I can be watching a game, any of the games. And on the other side of the screen, I can be on their Red Zone channel, right? Yeah. Where they're showing constant highlights and big plays and stuff. It is fantastic.
Yeah, I highly recommend you give the Thursday Night Football a go on Amazon. Okay. I haven't had a chance, but apparently their interactive features are second to none. Supposedly the best.
Oh, okay.
And you can watch 22 different camera angles of the game simultaneously if you want through it. It's supposed to be unbelievable. Anyway, so that's a little bit of a tangent, but I thought you'd like that trivia. It is Rings of Power is no longer the most expensive TV show on Amazon. Obviously, I'm being specious. Yeah. Sporting events are far different from TV shows, but just as an interesting piece of trivia for you.
Well done. Okay. Pete, we've got many episodes ahead of us. Should we give sneak peeks of what else we're going to be talking about in upcoming episodes?
That's right. The previous episode, which is actually our next recorded episode, is all about Streamer Skip. We will have talked about 9 Perfect Strangers. We will have talked about Hard Sell. And we will have talked about The Bear.
And we've also both seen Emily the Criminal.
Which we will also touch upon. Emily the Criminal, and I saw Confess Fletch. I have so many great things to talk about it. So a slightly longer...
I did not see that yet.
Slightly longer episode, but I think you'll all enjoy it.
All right. Stay tuned, everyone. More good stuff coming up. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.